My name is Ruth. I've been fascinated by the blockchain industry for the last 10 plus years. And with me, I have an incredibly interesting panel. And without further ado, I'd like you each to briefly introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you're doing. So starting with Carlos, thank you.
My side, Carlos René, CEO and founder of DEGA, where we're building AI tooling for integration with blockchain systems.
My name is Sohail. I'm Chief Web3 Officer at OODA AI. We're a listed company, and we provide private AI apps and private AI inference to large enterprises and individuals.
Good morning, guys. My name is Utkarsh. I'm the VP of Engineering at Webisoft, and we are one of the largest development firms on Midnight outside of Shielded.
Right. So let's start with the first big question. This is about the convergence of blockchain and AI in the context of Web3. And of course, we heard about blockchain for a long, long time. AI is really now the big hype. But how do these two things connect, and how do they actually manifest in what we call Web3? Where is Web3, and how are you contributing to this convergence and evolution of Web3? Carlos, let's start with you.
So on our side, we see that there's two use cases that are fully validated beyond a shadow of a doubt for the application of AI. One of them is the automation of customer support service. It's not really something that has much to do with blockchain, but the second one is productivity boost for code generation in software, right? So systems like Cursor, Lovable, and others that allow you to become 4 times to 10 times faster and more productive as a coder.
Sohail, yeah.
Yeah, I think the intersection of AI and crypto is really exciting because, I think Gavin Wood said Web3 and crypto stands for less trust, more truth. And so you don't have to blindly trust other humans or strangers, but you can rely on math and code. And AI is sort of the opposite. It's kind of more trust, less truth. So you don't know where your data is going, goes into a black box somewhere. You don't know what they're doing with it. You don't know if the actual models are being used that you expect to use. So it's more of the kind of trust me, bro paradigm. So I think that's what's exciting about the intersection, because you can bring transparency and credible guarantees, cryptographic guarantees to the usage of AI. And I think this also makes us a bit less cynical, because if you have to blindly trust something or someone's word, it's kind of a different thing than if you can verify that it's true.
I find that AI is the next evolution of Web3. And the reason I believe that is because of one simple idea: democratization. That's the fundamental principle behind which Web3 as a whole was started. Bitcoin was created so that you could own your own money. You would have financial independence. Midnight was created so that you would own your own data. You would have your control over your identity. And Web3 and AI was created so that you would be able to own the application layer on the AI itself, because AI is removing the barriers to entry to Web3. So now you and I, or anybody in the audience, can start building on Web3 with very little to no knowledge and achieve the same results as a seasoned developer.
And I think what you're pointing towards is the other big piece here, which is decentralization. We've seen for the last 2 decades too much centralization of our data with very large players. We see this now with AI, because obviously they have our data, so they can run the biggest models in the LLM world. And maybe just a few words on how can we manage to re-decentralize. It's something I wrote a book on 3 years ago. How do we re-decentralize to bring it back to the user and remove the dependencies on very large players? Because that's really the democratization aspect too, right? Anybody who wants to start on that? Yeah.
I would say for that to happen, language models need to improve a little more. So we are a few years away from that happening, that where on-device machine learning is at par with what we have on clouds today. So people could have models that are getting trained on their personal data, and they own the weights, which is the identity of that model by themselves. And that's going to happen in the next coming 2 to 3 years. That's my prediction for the industry.
Great. Okay. Right. Let's start with OODA. So, Hail. So, you're really looking at decentralization of AI architecture. You have institutional clients. You are in a space where people have to be very compliant with data privacy, but also with KYC, AML, and other pieces. Tell us about what you're doing there and how is that contributing to this fusion of AI and Web3 blockchain?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, essentially when I use AI, I want to know that my data stays private and that I'm getting what I'm expecting, right? For example, that I'm using the AI model that I'm expecting to use as well. So, and compliance is a big topic there, which I'll mention in the enterprise context in a sec, but basically that's what we're solving. So we can provide inference and apps that are built on top of it in a private manner, in a private environment, and in a verifiable environment. And we use trusted execution environments for that. I can get into that as well later, but basically you get guarantees around the service delivery. And this is really important also in a commercial enterprise context when it comes to GDPR compliance and so on. So the big companies that we work with, which are banks in Europe and telco companies, healthcare companies, and so on, they can rely on this data being treated privately in the computation, so in the usage of the LLMs, for example. And I think that is something which we should not make compromises on, also on the end user perspective.
So this really means that there are already tools out there people can ultimately embrace without necessarily going into Web3, right? Because these institutional clients are far away from like really embracing that. But I guess your point is here, it's about the ethical individual side, because when you deal with healthcare data, for example, you want to make sure it doesn't go into the wrong hands and it's shared by the wrong people, right? Okay. Now, DEGA AI, Carlos, you are providing agents that allow you to code without being an experienced coder. And really, you give sort of these tools into people's hands to design their digital kind of environments without needing to have all this expertise of coding. Tell us what you're doing with DEGA AI and how is that really helping to accelerate the adoption as well?
Yeah, so we started using, the conventional AI tooling ourselves, things like Cursor, Cloud Code, and others. And then what we've been doing is distilling our experience, our own knowledge as programmers and engineers in the blockchain space into a special type of, you could call it a skill, right, that we're giving the AI agents. We've used it to boost our productivity considerably. For example, when building out the Quantum Husky simulation for I/O, we did the equivalent of 2 weeks worth of work in one afternoon, right? That allowed us to meet a very tight deadline for that project. And now what we're doing is, after refining the tooling, we're going to enable everybody to be able to access it. For us, everything has always been about democratization, access, and lowering the barriers to entry, right? So blockchain has a very steep learning curve, right, to be able to operate, to create, to use. And that is what our AI will enable, not only to be able to use the existing platforms, but to be able to create new software, right, like scripts, bots, agents, and web apps that allow you to interact with all the protocols.
And do you see the adoption accelerating as a consequence of these tools that are easier to use? Particularly, I mean, obviously young generations are now quite natively in that space. But I guess if we all eventually move to Web3, it's almost like how fast are we getting parts of society into this game? Maybe just some examples of...
Yeah, I think that it's not happening just yet, right? But we're ramping up to that wave, if we could call it that, like that. And I think that in the coming 2 to 3 years, it'll onboard millions of other people that would have otherwise not jumped into the blockchain space.
And I think it's interesting for the AI side, because I'm also using a code-free AI agent where you basically just give instructions on what the agent should be doing, but it doesn't require me to be a coder, which I admittedly I'm not. I'm lots of other things, but the coding part, I had no time yet. And I think this is very interesting to give reliable tools that are also tested and improve over time, right?
Yes.
Into the hands of the many to actually participate in this economy. Right, let's think about the Web3 side, right, Utkarsh? I mean, you're working on creating smart contracts, dApps, automatically leveraging AI. Give us some examples of how you are playing in the space of converging Web3 and AI, and maybe some super super cool stuff that's happening right now.
So some of the really cool things that we have been engineering at Webisoft has been Web3 Fast. It's been one of our premier products this year that is really helping scale up and accelerate the adoption of Web3 and Midnight as a whole. Just to look at an example today, like there's about 100 hackers down there. There's about 7 projects right now that have been built end-to-end by hackers that did not have prior compact experience using Web3 Fast. So Web3 Fast is really enabling anybody with the idea and a motivation to build on Web3 to be able to build and execute on Web3. And we're right now at about 600 users and growing, and we have built about 1,000 compact dApps, and we're growing. So we're really excited for what the future holds for Web3 and AI in general, and we're really bullish on it.
So you're saying I can become a hacker pretty easily with your instruments?
Yes.
And all become hackers. That's an interesting conclusion of a panel, right? Well, obviously we're the good hackers, right? But maybe I have a question for you to follow on. What happens with these decentralized apps in DeFi? What happens if something goes wrong? How do you reverse a transaction, whatever it is, or re-engineer? What happens if something executes in a way that wasn't really what people wanted, or it is flawed in execution? What do you do then?
So I would say AI is really helping reduce the barriers to debugging, is what we call that in programming, and also testing and auditing in general. So these AI agents don't only write their code, they audit them using other models. They also set up test cases to validate behavior. And in case you have undefined behavior, which is what we would call this in a programming terms, you would be able to just take that behavior, give it to your model, and ask, what went wrong here, in a very simple way, the way you would be talking to your engineer. And these models would really break down the problem to a level where anybody with less or more experience can really understand what's going on here and be able to solve it more readily and more efficiently. And I don't think this was ever possible before.
Yeah, and you have a way of making sure that the AI really uses different validation, third parties and data sources, so it is an auditable process. I mean, you're sort of saying it's coding, it's auditing itself, it's doing third-party validation, which almost sounds like centralization, right? But there are ways to make sure that it's designed so it stays impartial and really finds the flaws, right?
Yep. So the way we achieve that at Web3 Fast and Webisoft is we use multiple models. And these multiple models almost work as a team of decentralized engineers. There's an engineer that's planning, there's an engineer that's testing, there's an engineer that's writing the code, there's an engineer that's auditing the code. And these 4 are independent model entities whose objective is just to achieve a particular directive. They're independent of each other's motives, narratives, or understanding of each other's context. So they're very isolated in their execution, and this is how we really decentralize AI execution at Web3 Fast at Webisoft.
So Carlos, do you see parallels to what you're doing as well in terms of how you're using different sources and building an infrastructure that really leverages everything that's out there? Maybe just give us some examples of how you do that.
Yeah, so for us, the key thing that we revealed actually in an event about 2 weeks ago, it's called Blockchain Jungle in Costa Rica. And what we're going to be focusing on is a similar tooling, but more narrowly focused on financial applications and utilities, right? So allowing people to connect between both decentralized and centralized exchanges, bridges, and kind of like a mix between, yes, generating new code, but also tapping into the existing APIs and kind of like be able to create your own automations, right, with it. So an example would be like a portfolio management system, for example, or a trading agent, and that's what we're going to be laser focused on delivering.
So Hale, do you want to briefly give us an example of one of your clients and how you really solved a problem using that convergence of technologies?
Yeah, for sure. So one example would be, for example, that we process medical claims for a large part of the German population with AI. So you can also call that intelligent document processing. And what it did is that it increased efficiency a lot for the company, because before that you had humans do it, and for one invoice or one claim it took 20 minutes for one person to process it. And now with AI it takes 3.5 seconds. And it is more accurate because this type of work, if you want to talk about general intelligence or something like that, it's not really conducive to that part of our brains. You will make some human error, some spelling error and stuff like that. So people were 73% accurate-ish, and the AI was 92% accurate. So essentially, this improves, as a clear value proposition for the enterprise. And the added benefit, of course, is compliance, because the inference is done in a private manner. So we come from both sides. We don't only talk about privacy in a sense. Of course, that's important as well. But we're also solving problems that companies have concretely on top of that.
So significant increases of efficiency to do something that humans are not very excited to do, let's say, in that sense, right? And being able to audit it and prove it and have the data to sustain it. Okay, let's think about predictions here, given that we're running on 2 minutes 33 in a second. How do you, Utkarsh, see the world in, I guess, 5 years' time in terms of this convergence? Is everybody going to have the AI agent doing stuff for themselves? What happens to people's job is maybe a separate question, but how do you see the next 5 years evolving?
I would say the next 5 years are going to be the most exciting 5 years of the human civilization as a whole. We're going to see growth and progress and prosperity at a rate we have not seen before. There is going to be a transition, so we're going to see some jobs go, but as with the industrial revolution and with every industrial revolution that has happened in the history, new jobs will be created to replace the old ones, and society will evolve to manage this model that's coming up. But people are going to be more efficient, people are going to be more knowledgeable, and they're going to have much more capabilities as a person than they do today. Everybody's going to be a developer, people are going to have better medical opinions, people are going to have better law opinions, and they're going to have just a vast amount of knowledge that they did not have access to before, being enabled by AI and this age of innovation we are living in.
Yeah.
So, Hale, anything to add to this?
That was beautiful. I mean, that was beautiful. I mean, I think there's this misleading quote as well, 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration to make progress. But it's actually not correct, because you can automate the perspiration part. And I think that's what technology does. So we can focus more on the inspiration phase. And AI is very good at the perspiration part, so it's a great tool to use. I think Einstein said, my pencil and I are smarter than I. And you can replace the pencil with computer or AI. So I suggest everyone picks up the pencil, so to say, and starts using AI, because it is like a multiplier for productivity.
It might trigger your own inspiration more than what you used to, because you're having more things in front of you to think about further. Yeah. Carlos, last word.
Yeah, on my side, I think that, technology for some reason sometimes gets like a bad rep, like people are very critical of it, and actually it's the most equalizing force ever, right? Like, to give you an example, right? Like, the richest person on planet Earth and the poorest person on planet Earth, their houses might be very different, but their phones are basically the same. And in terms of access to this type of technology, like artificial intelligence, the most powerful person on Earth can maybe have an AI that's a little bit better, right? But it's an equalizing force. So emerging markets are going to now be able to compete with USA, Europe, Canada, so get ready.
So exciting times. The convergence is happening. I think we are still a few years away from a real Web3 environment. But everybody here is working on this hard, and I think it will give the democratic access, it'll give the identity protection, data privacy where you need it, but it'll also hope to re-decentralize the world to make sure that there's just more equal access for everybody. So technology will help us. Give a big applause to the panel. Thank you so much.